As recently as a few years ago, the idea that we could use robots to intelligently see weeds and separate them from crops in real time as a machine rolled across the field and then shoot them with lasers all within a second's time seemed like a better script for a science fiction movie than a practical use on a farm. Fast forward to today, and with the rapid evolution in this area, we're seeing practical uses in farming operations, but there's a lot to sift through, many advances in evolution, and some still to come. So the intention of this presentation is to help you sort through these advances in evolution to pick out what might be usable on your farm in the near future. More specifically, we'll talk about the challenges that farmers want to overcome with robotics and automation. We'll talk about the advances in technology that I mentioned that allow us to now achieve these goals. And there are a few critical pieces that are needed to meet the practicality of today's farming operation. We'll talk about the status of robotics and automation for weed management. And in that, I'll share an example of some research that we've been conducting in specialty vegetables such as onions. And finally, we'll take a look into the crystal ball and predict maybe where this evolutionary technology is going next. First, let's revisit the presentation goals in general, given that this is a very new area and one, again, of very rapidly changing aspects. The goal of the presentation is not to convince you that these tools are right for your farming operation today. In other words, you may not go out and buy one of these tools today, and I'm not going to tell you which tool you should purchase for your farming operation. I will share with you examples of our experiences with two commercial tools that are available today that we used in our research in the past couple of years. That's not to say that there aren't other options and that there aren't more coming, because there are. These happen to be the tools that we had available to us on commercial farms. The goal of the presentation is more specifically to show you what that future of weed management will soon look like beyond the specialty crops in which I work, extending to the agronomic crops like corn and soy. And to foreshadow that, it's going to be different, but it's still a bright future in weed management. And also, let's get the concessions out of the way right from the beginning. Yes, these tools are currently expensive. They do operate slower than many of our current ground rigs, particularly in agronomic crops. With that in mind, their adoption is in the space in which I work, in high-value specialty crops, where herbicides are often injurious because it takes several applications to get season-long weed control in these non-competitive crops, and hand weeding is costly if it happens to even be available. But with that in mind, even though we're going to talk about specialty crops in our research example, this technology is changing at breakneck pace. And the analogy that I would use, or the example in this case, is the cell phone. Introduced originally in about 1984 by Motorola, the original cell phone could hold a charge for about 30 minutes. It weighed almost 2.5 pounds, and in today's dollar would cost over $10,000. Today, I would challenge that there are a few of us walking around that don't have a computer in our back pocket. We're at this first Motorola cell phone stage in the robotics and automation for weed management, but we're going to evolve very rapidly to the stage where we are with our current cell phone technology today. So let me give you a great example of that rapid evolution in just 1 year in our experience in our field research. And that example comes from the world of carbon robotics and their laser weeder technology. Again, just one tool that's currently available on the market in commercial operation. The experiences I'll share with you in our research are based on the first generation laser weeder on the left-hand side of your screen. That first generation weeder is 20 feet wide, has 42 high-resolution cameras that inform 30 lasers that can shoot up to every 50 milliseconds. In the period of 1 year, Carbon Robotics introduced their G2 or Generation 2 laser weeder in a modular unit with higher powered, more efficient lasers. And in the modular fashion, allows them to be expandable in widths now up to 40 feet, as opposed to the 20-foot piece that we're using in our research. This allows them to cover much more ground faster and with more efficient lasers, killing more weeds per minute in the operation. Moreover, they now offer an autonomous tractor kit to allow the Generation 2 laser weeder to be operated remotely, so it can operate 24/7 with someone in a distant location operating the tool, also increasing the efficiency of the overall operation. So that example is just in one evolution, 1 year of the commercial use of these tools. So let's revisit what we're really trying to address with these very novel tools. What are the current challenges in weed management that could be addressed by robotics? And then we'll look at the research that we're doing to see if we're able to meet these challenges. Number one, herbicide resistance is out of control, as seen in the picture on the slide with water hemp. We now have water hemp with resistance to 6 or 7 herbicide sites of action in an individual population. Many of the crops that I work with in the specialty world don't have 6 or 7 herbicide sites of action registered for use. New herbicide sites of action, to make it even worse, are few and far between. The most recently widely adopted herbicide site of action would be the HPPD inhibitors in agronomic crops, and that occurred with the development in the late 1980s. So we have a large gap without a lot of new novel sites of action introduced, and in the meantime, resistant weeds are getting out of control. Regulation will continue to limit our use. A great example would be the herbicide strategy adopted by EPA to be able to address threatened and endangered species and the habitat they rely on. And that could potentially limit the ability to control weeds broadly. In specialty crops, we also have existing herbicide programs that are duplicative or need to be repeated often. And in that cumulative application and dosing, we see injury that can reduce crop yield and quality. So anything we can do to reduce the number, frequency, and dose of applications may actually enhance our yield and quality. And finally, hand weeding labor, especially in the specialty crops where it has been used, is often not available. And when it is available, it's prohibitively expensive. So can we reduce some of these inputs and maintain yield and quality with these novel control tools? So what technology do we need to achieve those goals? There are really 3 key pieces that have driven this rapid evolution and adoption. Number one, detection, using accurate, high-resolution imaging. And the key there is not only to be able to separate crops from weeds, but also identify the growing point on individual weeds, so the novel control tools don't target the entire weed, they just target the growing point. The other key piece to the detection is to be able to do it in real time in a way that a weed can be seen and then tracked as a tool moves across the field, so that the control tool, let's say a laser, can target that weed as it tracks under the piece of equipment and know where it is to be able to control it. Interpretation is the next key piece, and this is where in many aspects of our lives, we're seeing rapid advances in artificial intelligence. In this application, it's used in algorithms to be able to separate crops from weeds in real time and learn from those experiences over time as more images are collected to be able to refine the accuracy of these tools. And then finally, we need novel control tools. Simply going out and spraying the same herbicides for which we have resistant weeds won't solve this. So we need novel control mechanisms to be able to control weeds without damaging the crops. And finally, a bonus is really to automate these processes above, as we know, attracting labor to agricultural employment has been a challenge in this country for decades. So a bonus would be able to do this in an automated way, not replacing current jobs, just filling our employment gaps in agriculture. So there are a few different ways that we might do this. One general category, again, providing examples here, would include spot sprayers like the one we see on the screen from Verdant Robotics. This has high resolution imaging to be able to separate the crops from weeds. Those images are interpreted with artificial intelligence, and they target these micro turret or precision sprayers that can drastically reduce our herbicide use by applying the herbicide, as you see with the agricultural dye in this demonstration, only where the weeds exist. Again, this can really reduce our herbicide use. We can conversely use it in a way to apply insecticides or fertilizer, for example, just to the crops, reducing those inputs and putting them only where they're useful. We also, for several years now, have had spot cultivators or smart cultivators. As an example here, we have the Stout Smart Cultivator. And again, it uses imaging to be able to separate crops from weeds, and then a mechanical tool to eliminate the weeds. It can also be used to thin out some specialty crops when they become overplanted and need to be reduced in population, like leafy greens in this example. And then the final piece would be laser weeders. And again, this is an example of one laser weeder from Carbon Robotics or others developing and working in this space. In the case of this Generation 1 tool that I'm going to show you our research experience, uses high-resolution imaging and algorithms available on over 100 crops to interpret crops from weeds, and then targets the weeds with lasers, in this case on this tool, that can fire up to every 50 milliseconds. So let's take a look, again, in our experience with these two types of tools, and the examples I'll use today are the Robotics ARA and the first generation laser weeder in commercial onion production. Again, a specialty crop for which herbicides provide incomplete weed control, and therefore they require a lot of labor for hand weeding, and a crop that's very uncompetitive over a long season. In the upper Midwest, the onion season goes from planting in April to harvest often in October, and we need complete weed control to maintain yield and quality. So on a commercial farm, using these tools, which I'll describe to you in a little more detail in just a minute here, we looked at 4 treatments: the conventional grower standard herbicide program, which in the 2025 season, I made 6 applications of different combinations of pre-emergent and post-emergent herbicide products, as would be typical across the commercial production. The laser weeder used 4 times over the season, the Robotics ARA precision sprayer 4 times, and then a combination of those 2 novel tools, the laser weeder and the Robotics. Importantly, when we were using these laser weeder and Robotics tools, we also included a pre-emergent residual herbicide at planting in onions and at 6-leaf onions. The reason we do that is to provide some very early season weed control, while the onions take about 3 weeks to a month to emerge to a 1-leaf stage, when the imaging and the algorithms can detect and separate crops from weeds. So we have to cover that early period with good weed control so that we're not playing catch up during the rest of the season. And then at the 6-leaf onion stage, we also provided a residual weed control application to extend to the end of the onion season when the onions were dense enough that these tools could not be used to target weeds without hitting the crop. Let's talk a little bit about the 2 tools that we used in this study. I've talked about the Carbon Robotics Generation 1 laser weeder. That includes 42 high-resolution scanners that inform the algorithm to be able to target 30 lasers over a 20-foot width. Each laser can fire up to every 50 milliseconds. The Robotics ARA precision sprayer that we used is capable of reducing herbicide use by up to 95% by specifically targeting small emerged weeds with a post-emergent herbicide. So the herbicide is only sprayed where the weeds exist, thus the ability to reduce overall herbicide use. This machine is able to do that again with high resolution imaging that informs 156 spray nozzles over the 20-foot or so operating width of this tool. So each spray nozzle is spaced about 1.4 inches apart, and they're able to spray on about a 2.4 by 2.4 inch grid on the young emerged weeds. So let's take a look at what these tools look like as we walk through my plots from the 2025 growing season. And we'll start with the grower standard herbicide program. And there are two aspects I'd like you to note here. Number one, compared to the plots you're about to see next with the Robotics or the laser weeder, you'll see that the onions are shorter. And that's due to the cumulative herbicide injury, even in this mid-season video. You'll also notice that there are a lot of weeds escaping, amaranthus species in particular, red root pigweed and water hemp, that simply, even with the full cadre and arsenal of herbicide tools that we have, we don't get adequate weed control. So we have crop reduction from the herbicides, incomplete weed control, and I'll show you what that does to onion yield and quality in just a few minutes here. Let's compare that to the laser weeder, where you see more vigorous, larger, greener, taller onions and very few weeds. Over 99% accuracy and very little hand weeding needed in these plots that were laser wed 4 times during the growing season. So we have a healthier crop, fewer weeds, less hand weeding. If we move on to the Robotics, we see generally healthier onions like we saw with the laser weeder. You'll note just a few weed escapes in here, primarily, again, those amaranthus species. And note where they are. They're very close to the onion plants, keeping in mind that the Robotics precision spraying is on a 2.4 inch, roughly, by 2.4 inch grid. So the weeds that escape tend to be very close to those onion plants. And as I'll show you, they still require some hand weeding. But when we put these two tools together, we see very clean onions that are healthy, with one exception that you probably saw in the beginning of this video, which was some yellow nutsedge. And believe it or not, that's intentional because we've shut off the yellow nutsedge function with these tools, knowing that the herbicides we have available and even laser weeding isn't probably the best use of those resources because it gives us incomplete nutsedge control. So that's one area where we're working very hard to speed up these tools through the field by using them where they're best. And then we'll go back with a hand weeding crew and pull those nutsedge patches where we're not getting complete control. So what does that do to onion growth and yield over a season as we reduce these herbicide applications and rely more on a non-chemical control like a laser? When conditions are good for general onion growth, we can see some rather large differences. In the pictures on the slide on the left-hand side, we have onions in the laser weeder plot. On the right-hand side of each picture, we have onions out of the herbicide standard. Left is in mid-season, right-hand picture is later on in the season as the onions develop bulbs as those leaves expand. And we can see significant gains in both these times of year during a good onion production season. I want to be careful to note that Mother Nature can equalize a lot of things in agriculture, of course. So we have these gains in a good season where we're able to control other aspects like in onions, leaf blights, Astor's yellow, thrips as an insect. So if we can keep those under control, we have the opportunity for significant gains. Taking just a little bit of a look at data of what this looks like in terms of hand weeding time. I've highlighted and read a couple of key aspects that we noted just from our 2025 research. Number one, the hand weeding time was significantly reduced or eliminated as the season progressed, where we were using the laser weeder. And again, you saw that accuracy in the video. Over 99% of the weeds were controlled with sub-millimeter accuracy. And we also saw some advantage where we combine the laser weeder and eco-robotics, again, at being able to reduce this hand weeding time. What does that mean in this example from an onion crop in terms of growth and yield? In onions, if you're not familiar with the crop, the leaves make the bulbs, so that's really important. More leaves, bigger bulbs, and more rings if you're growing onion rings. So we count leaves and we see an advantage where we use the laser weeder. Over the season, this advantage is continued and sometimes becomes even larger, and that results in a larger diameter onion, at least in mid-season. We didn't see that onion diameter gain last throughout the end of the season. And again, that may be because we also had some insect damage and a little bit of Stemphylium leaf blight. Again, a lot of these other stresses can moderate some of those gains. With that said, we had a large yield increase where we used the laser weeder alone or the laser weeder with the eco-robotics ARA precision sprayer compared to our herbicide standard. In some cases, we're looking at over 200 hundredweight more where the laser weeder is used alone and just a little bit off of that where we've combined the tools. So if we can control the other pieces that may affect onion growth outside of weeds, there is the potential for significant yield gain by using these novel control tools. So let's talk a little bit about the positives and negatives using, again, these two tools as examples. For the laser weeder, sub-millimeter accuracy, which I'll show you in the next slide, rapid and responsive algorithm adaptations. The real advantage to artificial intelligence is that the more these tools are used, the more they inform the algorithms, and the algorithms can adapt and become more accurate, allowing the tools to move through the field faster. The laser weeder, with that accuracy in scanning and interpretation, can be used very early in the crop season. And that's when we lose a lot of our potential yield because the onions, in this case, are very non-competitive in the early growth, slow to emerge and very slow to form a canopy. Nearly 100% weed control and elimination of costly hand weeding. And with that, as I showed you, the yield increases can be substantial if we can control all other confounding factors. And as I mentioned, under contract, these tools in the laser weeder world can now be remotely operated, allowing them to run 24/7 for complete weed control. The negatives, like many of these tools, they don't provide residual weed control. The laser works at the time of application, but what emerges the next day doesn't have that same advantage as a residual herbicide. They can certainly operate much slower than other technologies compared to a very wide boom on a spray rig, but that pace is increasing, again, as the tools themselves evolve, as new tools come on the market, and as the algorithms adapt to what they've learned. And these are at that early adoption phase, like I mentioned, with the cell phone, and there is a large upfront cost. This is an example of the laser weeder accuracy on a one-leaf onion. The cotyledon is starting to senesce in this case, so one true leaf, and a very small weed positioned right against the onion stem. And you'll notice, number one, the laser weeder did not hit the onion, and number two, it didn't even hit the entire weed. It just hit the growing point on this very young weed. Very accurate, sub-millimeter accuracy right up against the crop in this case. The eco-robotics, the positives, a significant herbicide use reduction by targeting post-emergent herbicides on very small emerging weeds. The manufacturer indicates that use reduction can be up to 95%. The tool operates faster than other modern weed control technologies, including the laser weeder, which allows it to cover more ground, operating at a speed roughly 4.5 miles per hour. It can be used to target specific hard to control weed species. So through the algorithm, it's able to indicate which species should be targeted. And again, conversely, it could be used to do things like fertilize just the crop or put insecticide just where the crop is, and not use any resources on the inner row space. The negatives, like the laser weeder, it doesn't provide broadcast residual weed control. Even if the herbicide that happens to be in it has some residual ability, it's not applied broadcast. So we don't know where weeds will emerge in the future, but it could be where weeds didn't exist at the time of application. It can't be used as early in the season, which allows some weeds to escape the control range, as I showed you. One would expect as these algorithms continue to learn and be refined, that ability to separate crops from weeds will also become more refined. The weeds very close to the crop are either not sprayed well, or if you make the crop safety zone very small, there is a risk with these herbicides that you could cause crop injury like in the broadcast application. In my experience from 2025, the bigger risk is that there are weeds positioned right against the crop that are really hard to hit with a micro spray. And it's important to note that with any precision sprayer, you still have to follow the herbicide labels. So herbicides that are registered and the use pattern for which they're registered on each crop still needs to be followed. We can't change the rates or the products from those not available or registered in the crop. This area is continuing to evolve rapidly, and as you see on the screen today, this is a swarm bot, a tool carrier basically automated. And the idea here is to show you that they can operate at very large scale also, and we'll expect that continued evolution. Conversely, they also operate at very small scales. Again, I shared an example from 2 tools with you, but with the rapid evolution and development, it's scale independent. So one would expect from agronomic row crops to diversified vegetable farms, as we continue to see this development, there'll be a right tool for the right place, including in these small scale tool carriers. So where do they best fit now, though? Where labor availability and or the cost of labor are limiting production is probably where we see this early adoption phase. In crops where weed management tools are very limited, certainly we can overcome the loss in yield and quality from weed competition or the loss of harvestability of crops with some of these novel tools. Also, where sublethal herbicide injury impacts crop yield and quality. And this is one area that over the past few years, using these novel tools, we've really come to appreciate the amount of potential cumulative herbicide injury we might get in these crops like onions, carrots, where we need several herbicide applications to get complete season-long weed control. And finally, because the cost of the tool is currently high, we need the crop value to be high to have a reasonable payback period. So one might anticipate that that will change as there's competition in the marketplace, further evolution and adaptation of these tools that are wider, faster, more refined. But as of today, the best placement is where crop value is high to justify the cost of the tool. So where do we go from here? As I've mentioned several times, robotics, automation, novel control tools are all advancing rapidly. There's a lot of competition in the marketplace. There are a lot of new novel tools coming to market and venture capital interest in those. So we would expect that that will continue, become more refined and more available to row crop producers. Our primary focus in our research really has been to find ways to increase implement coverage and speed without compromising weed control. And we can do that by integrating herbicides, other weed management tactics, The idea being none of these are likely silver bullets, but used together, we're looking for ways that we can optimize control and productivity, thus expanding the applicable use and practicality on crops on larger acreages.